Okay, Corain. I did this sculpt up. Took me about like 30 to 40 minutes just to kind of play around with it. Um, I wanted to kind of show you a little bit of like what I was thinking about when I was doing this, and compare it to kind of like what you have, right? And so this is the challenging part about doing stylized characters is that, the simpler they are, the harder it is to see how you can make variations to the character. So the first thing I always do, and this is what I had on my screen, other monitor the entire time, was I looked up a bunch of reference. So I just went to Pinterest, started collecting stylized references for animals. So obviously I got like some Zootopia ones. We went like quite a bit more stylized, like something like this, right? Which is kind of like the extent of stylization I thought I would have, right, in terms of how detailed or how dramatic the shape differences are. Thought this one was kind of interesting. In the end, it kind of has a goofy look to it, but still, just like this one, very simple shapes. Even these ones are a lot like the Zootopia ones. They're a little bit more lifelike, or they're a little bit more um, Disneyfied, but they are the head shapes are super super simple, but they're made of very specific shapes that help with the appeal. I found this like little cat made thing through Pinterest too. Don't turn it around because it's got underwear on for some reason. But still, like this was a good example of kind of like that nose, mouth shape, scale the eyes, even if our eyes are hidden. Also showing what the mouth could look like if we open it. I think with our character, we might as well open them. Love this little character. And I'll send you these images. So yeah, I mean, doesn't matter what I'm working on. I always have other people's work up on another monitor just to kind of get inspiration and get my brain going and just encourage me to try other things. Also love this. Look how dumb this looks, but that's it always starts off looking really, really dumb. All right, so going back into here, I'm using PureRef, by the way. It's a free application. If you're going to be working on a computer and you want to have a mood board for just yourself, it's an absolute must to have. While I'm here, let's go ahead and I think I can window, canvas, image, save, export. Okay, there we go. Export all images to my downloads. All right, so that way I can send you just the images separately. While that's going in the background, oh, great. Oh, okay, cool. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize this. The nice thing about PureRef too is, you can keep it on the screen. And actually, let's go and do that. So we'll keep something like these guys over here on the screen, kind of like the combination of these three very different looking characters here. It's, yeah, PureRef is awesome. So I can just do this, and it has a always on top mode. So the first thing I did with this project, or with this piece, is that I wish I'd saved some versions of it, but the first thing I did was I started separating it out to pieces. So I essentially cut the arms, cut the hands, cut the feet, cut the like waistline like an underwear shape, but mostly just cut the, here, I'll show you here. You don't have, obviously you're not going to be using ZBrush. I mean, you can. Sooner you get into ZBrush, the better for you, I think. But I knew I was going to like be repositioning pieces on a large kind of basis, and I wanted to simplify some things because you can even see here, like if we switched over to a silhouette, right, you can kind of see like some shapes like like there's some like little wobbly shapes that aren't quite exactly what we want, right? Whereas with this guy, right, like I'm being a little bit more I haven't spent a ton of time, but I'm being a little bit more particular about like the curves and straights of my character. I can still do some work, but I was trying to get like a more simpler taper cylinder kind of shape to his body, or to his arm, and even like the torso you can kind of see is like a bean shape. Almost feels more like a bean bag, whereas yours kind of feels a bit like more like a box. So even things like that, right? I'm kind of simplifying things out. One thing that is cool about this is from the side, like this creates a really nice silhouette. From the front, it definitely feels a little maybe oversimplified for me, but that's just my personal opinion. But something I was really noticing was when we get to the 3/4 is the one his like kind of leg torso thing starts to feel a little awkwardly human. And then also, and let's turn on perspective. I should be using this without perspective. And also his head kind of starts to be not as satisfying in the 3/4. Like it looks cool in the front, maybe a bit in the side, but there's something a little boxy and uncomfortable. And ultimately it's like, you know, he just kind of feels a little boxy. And especially his eyes, right? Like you can see how far forward his eyes like boop pop forward. You know, if I looked at him from in front, his face is like his eye sockets are super flat coming forward. You know, when in reality I expect the character's eyes to maybe sit, you know, let's do mask lasso, like maybe oh, I'm on the wrong piece, right? So maybe almost like back here, right? So if I like push this back, right, something like that, that's how far back I would like expect his eye socket to kind of sit back in. So anyways, so those are all a lot of things I was looking at, but anyways, back to what we were working on here. I'm gonna go ahead and whoops, my bad. I'm gonna go ahead and turn off the poly paint on that for a second, and let's turn off the line. Don't worry about the ZBrush specific stuff, right? I'm just, you know, do whatever equivalent works for your workflow. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna slice him up a bit. So I'm gonna go ahead and I sliced him right around where the shoulders were, like right there. I went ahead and sliced him kind of like this. Usually, like, you know, I want to kind of have like a, you know, underwear shape, like as if he was wearing whitey tighties, kind of like right across here, right? So you can see the whitey tighty goes down, you know, men and women's underwear, right? Like goes down the crotch and then rides up higher on the hip, right? And that's gonna, if you look at like a really simple action figure, you know, that it kind of has that shape too, because that's like, you know, we pivot or from right around here with our leg, and you know, we're gonna have some action up here with our leg. There's going to be like hip and bone right here that doesn't move, and then, you know, you get kind of like this squat or like this buttocks versus the back of the leg separation here. And then I kind of cut off his neck just because, you know, I liked making a cylinder, but we're not going to worry about that right now. I also cut off his hands. I always cut off like these limbs just because I feel like it gives me so much more room to play around with and focus on the limbs themselves. And I can visualize in my, just looking at it, I probably would cut off the tail too. I can visualize by looking at it, you know, if I turn this off. Let's go ahead and split them first. So let's go ahead and I'm going to mirror and weld. So you can start to see that. I mean, I even originally did something like this, right? Where I had like kind of the hip shape and separating that from the torso shape. And if you were going a little bit fancier, you could have like a rib cage shape too. Right? So this is rigid more or less, and then this is flexible, right? Like if you had a stylized character. Let's go ahead and pull up some really quick reference just to show you kind of what I mean. Let's see, downloads. I hope I have some in here. Nope, got rid of it. Let's see. Let me go ahead and pull up Chrome. Let's see, reference. Share drives. Okay, I'm starting to go too long. We'll give it just a few more seconds. Let's see, character sculpting. Pull this folder open. All right, well, here's one I did for a character. Right, so this is kind of like a simple stylized character breakdown, right, of the different limb pieces. And you know, you don't have to break it down this much, but you can see a lot of times people break up the hips and the rib cage from this kind of like flexible middle section, which is a bunch of muscles and your spine and your guts. But up here, this is like your rib cage, and this is your hip bone, so tends to be pretty inflexible. And then also looking at the rhythm of the body, right? Like there's this kind of like upward tilt of the chest, downward tilt of the pelvic region. There's like a flow to the legs, kind of going back and forth, right? If you looked at it from the side, right? Like here, I mean, there's things I have issue with this one too, but like, you know, there's like kind of this flow through the legs, and even where the head sits relative to the neck and the middle of the body, right? Like there's things that like, you see she has like way too, what it's called, articulated butts. So let's not worry about that, definitely. I guarantee you I cleaned that part up or simplified it. But let's see. All right, so this is like an anatomy reference folder I was sharing with some other students. But this is a very common way of like kind of separating out the torso or simplifying the character, even if they end up becoming very stylized. And so, you know, that this is kind of the same idea as the one that I just showed, right? Is this separation between these major body areas. And even then, when they end up being like, you know, this character isn't as simplified as your character, right? But even you can say there's like those hints of those anatomy pieces and even those forms and how they interlock with each other is all kind of playing really, really nicely together. Even as you go simpler and simpler and diminish those forms further and further. And even like a character like this one, which is very stylized too. Of course, again, this is more anatomical, even though it's stylized. And then here's that character I was working on right here. So I kind of broke them down into like different pieces to kind of help me with it. But anyways, and then here's some other ones I did as a study, which I recommend you guys do as a study. It's really fun. Okay, anyways, so let's not worry about that part. But anyways, so this is how you could separate it out. But I'm not going to do the hip torso part. I'm going to keep his body separate or simple. So in my case, what I did was I went ahead and separated these. So I just split two parts. Oh, actually, let's do group splits. Don't worry about any of the ZBrush stuff. So if I look at these, you can see these are all separate pieces. And then what I did was I just simplified them because your mesh is was like 2 million, and that makes things slow, right? Like let's go ahead and a lot of times I like to turn off poly painting and make my shader a little bit more noticeable. So let's go ahead and hide poly painting. And then let's go ahead and set this. Well, I might set this more to gray. So right, like you can see, like as I move this around, you know, I'm not getting super clean shapes, right? Smoothing's a little hard. So what I tend to do is I tend to like let's close these holes, and I'm going to ZRemesh them. In this case, you know, I'm using Maya, or ZBrush, which has ZRemesher. I'm sure Nomad Sculpt has to have some kind of retopology tool. But I'm keeping them as separate tools, right? Like I don't want them to combine together right now. They will later once I'm happy with everything. But I usually set it to a really low topology, right? Especially at this stage, because I want really, really clean, simple shapes. And you know, I might remesh it a couple times, and sometimes I'll just restart from a completely different primitive, right? And then a lot of times I'll turn on, like for instance, this has like what's called dynamic subdivision. It's a lot like the 3 button in ZBrush, or sorry, Maya, and the subdivision preview in Blender, right? It's just a matter of it has low topology, but it smooths it out so it looks like it's smooth. So I was just like making his body, like one, I was reducing his shoulders a lot. Let's not worry about the neck right now. I was rounding his body out so it's a little less boxy. I was kind of like giving a little bit of a taper from his torso down to his hips from the front. I was kind of straightening his back a little bit, right? This is a bit of anatomy stuff that I wanted to carry through for this character. And then his chest is like a little bit further back than his belly and his hips. So I kind of pulled that back, and I also pulled back his neck a little bit. So he kind of has a bit of a posture, which will make it easier for rigging and things like that, I think. Who knows? I've never done a character before. Anyways, so we're going to go ahead and I'm going to really define that separation in that kind of like pelvic region. I always call it, especially on stylized characters, like the underwear shape. So that's very clear. You know, it's as if he was wearing like Speedo trunks or, like I said, whitey tighties or something like that. And so, you know, that's going to make, just like an action figure, it makes rotating the legs a lot easier and maintaining this like kind of torso or pelvic region. Even if he's going to have pants on later, right? Like the pants should follow that shape. I mean, go look at your jeans in your closet or something like that, right? Like they're all going to, it's going to have that kind of crotch region really well defined, just like this one. And on all these ones, I'm doing the same thing, right? In this case, I'm just following this ZBrush workflow where I'm closing and then remeshing so that they're really low topology, right? And then simplifying the shapes a bit. I'll even do things like polish, right? In this case, in ZBrush, polishing like just averages the vertices, so it just simplifies the shape a lot. And then in this case, I was getting like kind of like a taper. Let's go and turn dynamics into subdivision. I was getting like a taper down from his like thighs and hips. You know, I was specifically kind of having fun with making him a little wider in the hips, like almost like Porky Pig or something. Not that, you know, chubby, but something like that. And then I was also giving his legs a bit of like a a curve to the front so that the back is kind of like a little bit straighter, right? So he has that kind of body rhythm. Another thing that's pretty crucial, not crucial, but very useful for making style or appealing stylized characters is I'm going to go ahead and I'll try to remember to share this with you later. Let's see. Ooh, I had it open earlier, didn't I? Yeah, there it is. Okay. So I also put in some guides in here. So let's see, anatomy reference, book guides. So I have like this anatomy for sculptors book, which is great. But I also have this like block out notes from, he's former Disney, works at Netflix as a character sculptor. And so I actually learned a lot of stuff from him. And so he's kind of talking a lot about this kind of like layout, but he also talks a lot about things like straight versus curved, right? So you can see it here, right, on this example, right here. He's giving a lot of good notes, but right, like these are like really boring, just mirrored shapes. But you can see he starts to kind of like make straight versus curved, a little irregularity across them, just makes more interesting shapes. A lot of like intentional, what's it called? Intentional tapering, things like that. You'll also see this rhythm again, right? Like, so curved versus straight, curved. And there's, this is just natural on a human being, right? And we kind of expect that a little bit from, even stylized characters. And again, like I said, we can simplify this a lot, but, in this character, like these things are very simple, but look at how clean those lines are, right? And of course, on a character like this, we're really like exaggerating that anatomy, but yeah, let me go ahead and I'll send you this folder. Who cares? I'll link to that folder and you can look at it as much as you want. So anyways, all right, so let's go ahead and take a look at the arms. Same thing. I'm going to go ahead and simplify this limb. And you look at it down here, like these are, I'm bringing these down from like 20 to 30,000 to like 1,000. And let's go ahead, and in this case, I'm just going to polish that a lot. Let's turn that on. Let's go ahead and turn on dynamic subdivision, just because I kind of wanted to lose, and I could just use the smooth brush. I just kind of wanted to really lose that shoulder kind of armpit, because we had like this transition where it was kind of like webbing down like this, and you don't really want that, right, on armpit if you can help it. Like if you want a sloping connection, you want it to be on the top of the arm, right, like the shoulder part. The armpit part should be as a little bit more segmented away from the torso, like the arm. And there's like more of a delineation right there. And later on, what we might want to do is we might want to test out, rotating the body parts. I think I talked to you guys about this in class, is like rotating the body parts in order to, and let's go ahead and I'm actually going to, I was doing your character more like a little bit more A pose, just so I can figure out I could put it back into T pose later, but I kind of want to figure out how the shoulder would look when his arms are down. Right, because like we were talking about, like looking kind of like at some of those Zootopia references, I didn't see y'all's character as necessarily having like very prominent shoulders, right? Kind of made him a little cuter, instead of like looking like he's a linebacker, So let's go ahead and pull that. I did want a very distinct area though between the neck and separating the neck out is going to make that a lot easier. But I did really want a distinct area between the neck and the shoulders though. So I did want this kind of like, almost if he was wearing like a tank top, right? So if we look at the other one, right, you can see there's like this very clear delineation between his neck and his arms. So something you can see on this one that I was doing, I definitely had more time to play around with this one, is I was kind of like playing around with like the thickness of these arms, especially up at the base, right? Kind of like, personally, I think while I was having fun with this, I like the idea of like big tapering, not too much where it doesn't make sense if you tried to like bend his arms, and having a separation between his upper arm and lower arm. Like I didn't want it to be like, I don't know, like they're spikes essentially, but I did want to kind of just play with it a little bit. And that's kind of the point of this is, you want to just, part of the design process is the 3D part, right? It's going to be not all just like, you're not just all following the rules from 2D, right? Because 2D isn't accounting for everything. So you have to be a designer as well. So that's where you want to play around. You want to look at reference. You want to figure out how are other people representing these characters, right? And let's go ahead and close holes, and I'll zero mesh the feet and move those into position. I'm not going to worry about the little pads right now. Oops. Let's go ahead. Oop. Let's pull that over. Let's rotate that. Oop. This is getting ridiculous. This is getting ridiculous. Now there's two of them. All right, so let's go ahead and pull that over. Push this over. All right. And push this back. Cute pause. Yeah, so you can kind of see how he's getting a little bit like in the body, like starts to have a little bit more definition to it. And you know, I'm just kind of exaggerate. I might exaggerate some things, you know, to make his proportions a little bit more interesting. Let's go ahead and it's natural that the character gets out of symmetry at some point. So let's turn that off local. So, you know, totally normal at this period of time. His arms felt a little long, so I actually kind of shortened his arms a little bit. Like, personally, I like it when if a character rotates their shoulders, their fingers would land in around the mid-thigh. That usually gives a I mean, that's what happens on us, and it tends to give a pretty comfortable, you know, kind of length of the arms, unless your character is meant to be like a gorilla or something like that. Another some things that you can really kind of play with for proportion is like the placement of the height of like his legs versus his torso, right? Like I think that's usually a really good kind of thing to play around with. That's not going to mess things up a bit. The length of his neck, of course. Size of his head, hands, and feet compared to the rest of his body. I think length of arms is kind of hard to work with, right? Like too short or too long starts to feel just like kind of like he's just wrong, you know? In the other version, I made his hands a little bit more articulated. In this version, I might, you know, we might want to, okay, that's good that I'm probably saving. We might want to go ahead and like make it more paw-like, but I mentioned this in class the other day is, you know, the more paw-like his hands are, the less you can like articulate his fingers. So if you wanted him to like grip things, hold things, right? Like I kind of actually like made his fingers slightly more segmented. I like made his thumb, like I even pointed it and oriented like our thumb is, you know, it's kind of like down at an angle. A bit more like a human thumb, so that he can grip things. And I would have to spend time refining him. I didn't mess with his feet though. So let's turn on, yeah. So that's that stuff. Let's go ahead and fill this stuff in. Fill object, color, RGB, color. All right, let's go back to this one though. All right, so, and let's set this back to gray. So let's go to the head. First thing I did was I just chopped off the ears, right? So I just, you know, this doesn't give me a whole lot to play around with, right? And again, like if I can represent this with a simpler shape. Okay, that's weird. Oh, I'm on the wrong tool. Let's see. So I'm just gonna lop off his ears. Let's go ahead and delete that. Delete hidden, mirror weld, close holes, close holes. All right, and then let's go ahead and I'll just shave this down. And then I'm just gonna Z-remesh him. It looks cute. Z-remesh. That's too low, so let's go a little bit higher, but not too much. I want it to be fast and responsive and flexible. I'm not worrying about this little mouse shape. I'm actually going to use another object for that. So I'm going to go ahead and hide the eyes because one, we're not going to see the eyes. Let's not worry about the path either. And also just worrying about their placement and all that stuff is going to be a little frustrating. What I did was I went ahead and inserted another sphere again, and I went ahead and brought this down to like a lower topology because this sphere is really high poly. I'm not going to worry about the shape or the topology too much, but I do want it to be fast and responsive, right? So let's go ahead and Z-mesh that. Okay. Let's turn on symmetry. Let's scale that down. So a lot of these characters I'm noticing, from Judy Hopps to like that really stylized character that we were just looking at, right? So like this guy and even this guy, right? Their head is kind of made up of two intersecting shapes, right? Like you have this really basic shape. In this case, his head's like a trapezoid or like a hot pocket, and then his mouth area is like a completely different shape that's intersecting it, right? You look at Judy Hopps, you know, it's like a separate piece. Same thing with this guy, and then they become a little bit more complex, but you know, that's something I'm noticing on a lot of these characters, and so I do want those shapes to start off very distinct, right? So I can be really intentional with my shapes, But then, then we'll blend it and make it look clean and nice and pretty, right? That clean and nice and pretty part is like the transitions and all that stuff. That part's not what I want to worry about at stage. I really just want to worry about how his overall proportions and larger shapes are looking. So I'm going to go ahead and hide the mouth bits. Maybe I'll keep the nose. That little mouth bit, eventually I would just get rid of it and do something kind of like these guys right here, where I would actually make a mouth, like this guy. You guys don't have to go that, and I know I encourage you guys a lot to scope back and make your character simpler, but I think it's worth it, and I think it's probably going to be more interesting for you or whoever's doing the character modeling as like a design challenge, or like a character modeling and design challenge, and even rigging. And you guys do have the rigging support through Gus, so I think you guys will be able to do it, right? So it's up to you guys. So I'm just kind of finding a shape that I like. And this one, I'm just going to simplify it a lot more. Like I said, I want the eyes to sit back a little bit more, right? So I'm going to bring, his face will be a little flatter, right? But then his eye sockets usually, like I might do something like this where I'll use like a cut brush and kind of cut in this basic shape right there, as I'm like blocking in, because that's going to help me separate like the eye socket area and then the forehead from like the cheek and muzzle area. So let's go ahead and let's zero mesh this one again, just so the topology keeps consistent. So let's go ahead and keep separating that, and then I'll smooth it off, of course, and make it quite a bit simpler. But yeah, let's go ahead and I'm going to keep playing around with this shape. So I'm going to just scale it down. The nose is getting in the way, so let's first, I do want it to be a little bit bigger, because sometimes big features on small faces can be really cute. Eyes and nose are ones that can look really cute. But let's go turn it off for a second. Oh, nope, it's not turning off. So, let's go ahead and scale that down. I'm looking at characters like that guy, right? His eyes are huge, so, maybe we're not going to have this much of a scale proportion, but, I'm able to play around with it quite a bit. Let's look at it from the side. I'm going to go ahead and just, kind of like reshape his head back a little bit. Let's go ahead and bring the corners of his jaw cheek area back a little bit as well, right? So it's like a little bit more like that instead of forward like that. Just personal preference, but you could change that. And if I do want some curvature to his cheeks, I can just come in here and add a little bit of volume to them, right? So maybe we do want to have like a more distinct, you look a little chubby there, but we do maybe want to have a little bit more of a distinct kind of lower mouth, chin, jaw, fat cheek area, which a lot of these characters tend to do, right? Like looking at this guy, right? You have that separation. Same thing with this guy, it's very subtle, but this kind of whole area kind of feels a little bit more separated. You can see it on this one, right? Separated from the eye socket region. The place where I'd probably play around a bit is, how much his forehead juts forward, and even if it's going to be covered, I mean, it's up to you guys. Again, like if I was doing this character, I would want my character to look good even without his helmet and his glasses, like, so I might sculpt and model those parts just because I like characters and I would want to do that. But I'm not going to, again, I'm not going to enforce that on you guys. So if you guys don't want to do that, that's totally cool. Usually like the back skull cranium area to be a little bit smaller than the front side jaw face area. Like I usually have the jaw is usually the widest part. And the cranium kind of shrinks in, especially on these stylized characters, right? Like we want that to be a lot smaller than it is on like a human. That's why a lot more of this space here is, if I just define this a little bit more, right? This is kind of like the jaw face area. I might even reinforce like the side plane versus the jaw right there, just so I can kind of get an idea. Let's go ahead and just make that a little bit more explicit. Right, so, it's kind of stupid, but it's okay. Eventually I'm going to smooth that away and clean it up, but that's just going to help me kind of see the landmarks of the face. And yeah, so I'll keep doing that. And a big part of this is kind of figuring out where is that nose going to go in this case. So let's go ahead and bring that nose in. I want it to be like a cat, right? So cats you know, and some of these cat characters, and you have this mouse, but even this cat character here and these cat characters over here, they're a little higher and upturned, right? So I'm definitely not going to have like a really tall muzzle like I do here. So relative to the muzzle bridge in the nose, I'm going to have that nose a little bit higher. I might even kind of shape it like that. And, you know, on a cat, I think you really want the muzzle region to be subtler, you know, whereas, you know, like a dog is going to have something a little bit more like that, like a longer muzzle, right? Which tracks with what we know of the shapes of cats and dogs' skulls, right? You've seen cats and dogs. Cool. So then I'll do something like this, you know, I'll even be really, try to be as intentional as I can with the nose shape too, right? Like start off keeping it pretty simple. In this case, I need a Z-mesh. This is a little too high poly for such a small object. Oh, it was asymmetrical. So let's go ahead and mirror and weld. Let's mirror and weld. There we go. And then let's Z-mesh that down. Just keeping it as simple as I can. Without, you know, completely losing its shape. Let's do that. So, you know, we might do something kind of like this character where, you know, he has like a bit more of like a mushroom kind of shape. In this case, you know, he still has like a very, very clean, you know, by how those nostrils are drawn, right? Like this super cool, clean shape. He's more of a puma kitty, or like kitty cat than a, you know, a house cat. So maybe a house cat, you know, is going to have not quite as wide of a nose, you know, but that wide nose does give him a little bit of distinction and make him unique as a character. So, you know, maybe we do something like that. I think that little mouth shape you guys have is fine to start with, like laying out and trying to figure out where the mouth is. So, you know, I'll do something like this and pull that back here. Of course, you know, like now this muzzle thing is like is more dimensional. So, oh yeah, this thing's like made up of like, let's see. Oh, I don't know why the polyframe stuff isn't working. There we go. It's like made up of like 1,000 objects. So that's totally fine, but I was just really confused when I first ran into that. So let's go ahead and just, in this case, I'm using ZBrush, so I'm going to Dynamesh it. Whoa, too low. All right, and let's go ahead and do F9 to save. Come on. Or is it F8? I don't know what I'm doing. Oh, 9. There we go. Not F9. And let's Z-mesh that so it's simpler. It's mirror and weld. Okay, let's just do it that way. Mirror and weld. And then we're just going to go ahead and Z-brush it. I know I'm going really fast in ZBrush. Like I said, I'm not expecting you to keep up. And I do expect you, if you're pretty new to this stuff, this stuff should take you longer, right? Like I'll be honest, not just because, you know, wow, I'm so experienced, I know what I'm doing. But, you know, I like, this is like Photoshop for me. Like I know all the buttons like by heart and muscle memory. So this stuff is just like, it just is something I've done for a really long time. Something I'd play around with is like, you know, how low his mouth is. You know, it's definitely more baby-like if his mouth is up higher like that. It definitely gives his chin more space, you know, but, you know, we can play around with that. Let's go ahead and keep that there. Let's go ahead and I'm going to fill that in with a darker color. We can go and fill that in just so we can kind of see that. So maybe that chin's too long, so we'll just pull that up a little bit. But yeah, so you can kind of see how this is all shaping up and how everything's going. And this is about where I ended up with. Obviously, I went a little bit further with this one. And actually, some of these things, I kind of like this better. You know, and every time you do it twice, you know, it's better each time. Like, I think the muzzle, mouth, nose thing looks better and cuter here. I kind of like that shape better. Obviously, I think like the torso and like the hips and the arms stuff is kind of nice. Yeah, I still like this one better. So yeah, second time I've done it. I mean, the neck is better over here, obviously, and then the ears, right? So the ears, again, like everything else, I'm just gonna create a new shape. In this case, I made like a sphere. I went ahead and cut it down to flatten it on one side. Went ahead and scaled it down, maybe flattened it a bit more, so it's not quite so deep. Again, I'm going to bring it down to a really low topology so it's super flexible so I can get, again, we're doing stylized characters. I want really clean shapes. And so then what I did with there was I just brought it here and, you know, kind of just shaped it into, you know, it could be based on the reference. Maybe, again, you go off, let's play around a bit more and go off reference. You know, that's part of the process. Let's go ahead and bring that down a bit more. You know, I do know from a cat, you know, I want this to be a little bit more pyramid shape compared to, say, a mouse, right? So, you know, I want those shapes to be a little bit more angular there, pulling it up, something like that. So that starts to feel a little bit more like a cat. Let's go ahead and pull this forward, so right around that jaw transition area. And also, you know, I didn't want it to be straight up and down because that's boring, and also not quite how cats and most animals' ears kind of connect, so I want something like that. Let's go ahead and flatten it down a little bit more. Go through, just smooth off some of these transition shapes. You know, and some of this stuff, you know, I eyeball it and I'm like, oh, I don't want that thing. I know what that shape is that I want. But you know, that stuff takes time. And also, like I said, some of that stuff is personal preference. So I, you know, want this base to be a little bit more volumetric down there. Let's go and turn that on. Soft select. And you know, let's go ahead and mirror it. And so the nice thing about it being separate is I can play with its positioning really easily, right? I can play with its positioning really easily. Maybe kind of like you had it before, it's a little bit more pointy and just straight up like that. So something like that. And, you know, I can always remesh this or something like that. So maybe it's something kind of more like this. Kind of gives him a little bit of a Doberman ear look, but you know, that kind of works for a cat, I think, still. So that's a little bit more like what you had there earlier, you know. You know, maybe just taking some inspiration from that, or even looking at some characters through my references, I might notice, you know, I've already lost the shape a little bit from smoothing stuff too much, so I might remake that base shape. And, you know, remaking things and, like I said, separating things, making them twice, it's so normal for modeling, right? Like every time you run into something that's just too annoying to work with, because, you know, it's too high poly or it's just got too much detail, or, you know, the shape just gets too wobbly and you forgot what you lost the essence of it, right? Let's put that a little bit more forward like a cat. Yeah, I'm not liking this ear shape. It's a little gross. But yeah, I should just remake it or, you know, duplicate it. And before I do that, so I have these to kind of fall back on if I mess anything up. Let's go with something like that. And then I put his glasses on, and then I'd figure out his helmet once the rest of his shape of his head's looking really good. So, you know, refine the cheeks a little bit more. Let's go ahead and subdivide that once so it looks good. And I really do not try to do poly painting, you know, as much as I can, right? Because I'm like, you'll notice I'm looking at these shapes like in all views, right? Like I'm not just looking at it from front and side and being like, looks good enough, right? Like, let's go ahead and I'll do this. Let's go ahead and, well, we got our character right here. So let's go ahead and merge this folder. So merge folder. Let's turn off the poly painting. Turn on that. And so, you know, like, let's go ahead and turn that off. Come on. So, and we can hide his eyes just because I know the eyes aren't going to be a thing. So let's do auto groups. So there we go. All right. Save. Oh, not save. Let's do mirror and weld. That's what I was going to do. Mirror and weld. All right, let's hide those eyes and delete them because we don't have eyes on the character. Cool. So, you know, from the front, right, might fit really nicely for our reference. Same thing with maybe the side, but kind of showing you the difference, right? Like a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more interest there. In this case, you know, I was playing around a lot with his proportions here, but personally I like them better. You know, I got rid of the wider shoulders. We have some like really more intentional shapes. Like he has like this eggplant body, these tapering kind of flowing arms instead of being straight, right, or wobbly or boxy, right? And then especially in 3/4, right? And that's the hard part again with your references is like, you might go off, go like, you know, kind of trace it, you know, and match it against reference perfectly from the front side, but it doesn't always work in the 3/4 very well, right? So, you know, you kind of have to like think about it in the round, right? So looking at it in a lot of different views and kind of getting shapes that feel really nice. Things I'm noticing, right? Like this is popping out, so I push that in. Another thing I do is I don't rely too much on these shaders, right? Like it's really tempting because it makes your model look good earlier to do things like, I guess, what would be the one that would be in here? I mean, this one right here is kind of like one, but in my or ZBrush, there's like things like skin shade or something like that, and it just gives you this really flat lighting, which is cool. You know, I use this one called ZBrush Paint if you ever use it, but a lot of times I'll use something like my basic material, which has like a very like normal kind of shaping to its shadow and lighting, right? Because that just immediately makes me notice issues on my model in terms of form and volume that I might not be aware of. Also, another thing is I'm always working in perspective if as much as I can. Sometimes I'll turn off perspective and do orthographic, but um, perspective is what we're going to see our model as, right? We're going to see perspective on our camera, so we might as well, let's bring this back. So we might as well be working in perspective. So obviously, I mean, I'm not going to worry about this kind of detail because I know that this is too high of a polish detail, but there's like a little bump here, right? See that little bump there? Not always easy to tell, you know, with other materials. In this case, it has like a glossy specular to it, so you can see it. And you know, you can do things like a blend or some kind of shiny material, which can also reveal like form issues, right? Like we have this weird ridge here that I'd want to fix. This gets a little too soft. I get a bit of a bump here too, and those are due to topology things, so I can fix that by just increasing my topology a bit and smoothing it out. You know, this area right here, kind of like, just look a little wobbly and uncertain, not committed to anything. You know, I obviously got to fix that and got to fix that area. But anyways, so hopefully this helps kind of give you an idea of how you can plus your character and not go too far down like you guys were talking about, like is it ready to retopologize? And I think we're just thinking about that way too soon, right? Like we're still in the sculpting volume shape finding stage, right? Like we want to make our character look as good as possible in you know, kind of a procedural step as possible, right? Like I'm not going to start doing like details and things like that. If I was doing the hand personally, I would probably recreate the hand from scratch, right? And I would just start from like a cube and like model out a good finger shape that I like. In this case, I mush them around a bit, which ends up giving you kind of like these irregularly shaped fingers, right? But you know, it's kind of wobbly and messy. Hands are really hard. And hands are especially hard if you're working from an existing hand and you really want to just like, oh, I just want to keep using this hand. And so you're just pushing and pulling stuff around. It's like kind of, people will call it like pushing and pulling verts, right? Like that's kind of the extent of what happens. You know, you guys don't have to do this, but you know, I kind of liked his head having kind of like an angular kind of shape to it. Let's go ahead and smooth that out a bit. I went ahead and merged these all together, which obviously again, not great. Because now I can't easily move and control these things separately. But I did want to just make an adjustment to his ears because I wasn't super happy with his ears. Let's go ahead and do here. Oh, come on. And again, just because I'm using ZBrush doesn't mean you guys have to. Just do whatever works for your workflow. But, you know, again, I want you guys to take a step back in terms of like figuring your character out in 3D. Really simplify, like breaking them into more shapes, but then keeping those shapes clean. So we get great, smooth and interesting forms. And we can really play with the character's proportions. Okay, he's starting to feel like a kangaroo. All right, I just need to stop messing around with those ears. So yeah, I keep repeating myself at this point just because it's hard for me to get away from a model and not keep working on it. So what I'll do is I can shoot this to you guys. I'll send you the video, or maybe I'll probably just end up taking pictures of this just so. I don't think you guys would, but you know, you guys aren't tempted to just like start from this model, right? Because it's supposed to be your model. I don't think you guys would want to do that. I think you guys would want to make your own character. Okay, this is getting ridiculous. Let's get rid of that. Delete. Okay. I had this all in here. All right. So anyways, cool. I'll go ahead and send this to you, and I hope this helps.